A janitor pressed his lips to a dying billionaire's mouth, and they called it assault. Eli Barrett saved Juliana Reed's life with CPR while her own executives stood frozen. His reward? Termination. Public humiliation. His face plastered across the internet as a predator. But the woman he saved was about to wake up. And when she discovered the truth, the empire that tried to bury him would tremble. Watch until the end. Comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of the 37th floor hummed with a frequency that most people never noticed. But Eli Barrett noticed everything. After 3 years of pushing his cleaning cart through the glass and steel corridors of Reed Industries headquarters, he had learned that the building spoke in whispers, the subtle flicker of a dying bulb, the soft groan of elevator cables, the distant echo of footsteps on marble that told him exactly who was walking and how fast. Tonight, those whispers felt different, charged, electric. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday in late November, and Philadelphia had already surrendered to the bitter cold that rolled off the Delaware River. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet, a view that cost more per square foot than Eli made in a year. He didn't look at it anymore. Beauty like that wasn't meant for men like him. His cart squeaked as he navigated around the reception desk, the sound almost musical in the empty hallway. Most of the executive floor had cleared out hours ago, but light still blazed from the main conference room at the end of the corridor. Through the frosted glass, he could see silhouettes, a dozen, maybe more, and hear the muffled rise and fall of voices. Board meeting. Emergency session. He'd heard the whispers in the break room, something about a hostile takeover attempt, foreign investors circling like sharks, numbers that made his head spin, billions of dollars hanging in the balance while he worried about whether his daughter's school shoes would last another month. Eli checked his watch. His shift ended at midnight, but he had promised Mia he'd try to get home early tonight. She had a math test tomorrow, and ever since her mother left. No. He shut that door in his mind, the way he always did. Some rooms were better left closed. He was reaching for the handle of the supply closet when the conference room door burst open. "Where's Dr. Mitchell?" A woman's voice, sharp with panic. "Someone find Dr. Mitchell." Eli's cart forgotten, he turned toward the commotion. People were spilling into the hallway, men in suits that cost more than his car, women in designer dresses, all of them wearing the same expression of frozen terror. "She just collapsed. Call 911. "Is she breathing? Is she breathing?" The crowd parted for a moment, and Eli saw her. Juliana Reed lay crumpled on the conference room floor like a broken marionette, her silver hair fanned across the polished hardwood, her lips an unnatural shade of blue that made his blood run cold. He knew that color. He had seen it once before, on a construction site in Kensington when a coworker's heart had simply stopped. That man had died. Time seemed to fracture into strange, crystalline shards. Eli watched as executives in $1,000 shoes stood in a perfect circle around their fallen CEO, their hands covering their mouths, their eyes wide with horror, but their feet rooted to the spot as if the carpet had turned to quicksand. "Has anyone called an ambulance?" someone shouted. "I'm calling! I'm calling! Don't touch her! We shouldn't touch her! Where's security?" Eli's feet were moving before his brain caught up with them. Later, he wouldn't remember deciding to push through the crowd. He wouldn't remember the sharp elbow that caught his ribs or the hand that grabbed his collar. All he would remember was the impossible blue of her lips and the certainty, absolute and unwavering, that if someone didn't do something in the next 30 seconds, Juliana Reed was going to die. "Move!" The word tore from his throat with an authority he didn't know he possessed. "Move! Now!" He dropped to his knees beside her, muscle memory taking over. The CPR certification he'd gotten at the community center 2 years ago, the one his supervisor had mocked as a waste of time, flooded back like a song he'd never forgotten. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, check for pulse, repeat. His hands found her sternum, fingers interlocking, arms locking straight. He pressed down hard, harder than felt right, but the instructor's voice echoed in his head. "You're not trying to be gentle. You're trying to restart a heart." 1, 2, 3, 4. What the hell is he doing? A man's voice, dripping with disgust. Get him off her! Who is that? Security. 5, 6, 7, 8. Eli didn't look up. Couldn't look up. Juliana Reed's face was slack, lifeless, and somewhere in the building, phones were ringing and elevators were climbing, and the world was continuing to spin while this woman's heart sat silent in her chest. 15, 16, 17. I said get him off her! A hand grabbed Eli's shoulder, fingers digging in like claws. He shrugged it off without breaking rhythm. 30, he counted aloud, then tilted her head back, lifted her chin, pinched her nose shut, and sealed his mouth over hers. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was almost louder than his own racing heartbeat. 1 breath. Her chest rose and fell. 2 breaths. Did he just... Oh my God, he's kissing her! Someone stop him. He's assaulting her. The words hit Eli like physical blows, but he was already back on compressions, his arms burning, sweat dripping down his temple, despite the air-conditioned chill of the room. 1, 2, 3, 4. Something struck his back, an open palm maybe, or a fist. Pain flared between his shoulder blades, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Get away from her, you animal! Security! Where is security? 12, 13, 14. I'm performing CPR, Eli shouted, his voice cracking. She's in cardiac arrest. Does anyone know CPR? Then either help me or get back. The crowd fell into a stunned silence, but only for a moment. He's lying, someone snarled. He's taking advantage of her. I saw what he did. That wasn't CPR. 23, 24, 25. Eli's arms screamed in protest. His back throbbed where he'd been struck. And somewhere in the chaos, a small, terrified voice in his head whispered, "This is how it ends. You're going to prison. Mia is going to lose her father because you couldn't just look away like everyone else." But he didn't stop. 29, 30. He tilted her head back again, sealed his mouth over hers, and breathed. 1 breath, 2 breaths. Nothing. He returned to compressions, his vision starting to blur at the edges. How long had it been? 2 minutes? 3? The textbook said brain damage started after 4 minutes without oxygen. Death came soon after. Come on, he pleaded silently, his hands pressing down, down, down. Come on, don't do this. Don't you dare do this. 1, 2, 3. The ambulance is on its way, someone shouted from the hallway. They said 10 minutes. 10 minutes. She'd be dead in 10 minutes. 8, 9, 10. A new figure pushed through the crowd, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and a face carved from granite. Eli recognized him from the employee newsletters. Harper Doyle, Chief Financial Officer, second in command. What in God's name is going on here? Doyle's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. His eyes fell on Eli, on the janitor's hands pressed against the CEO's chest, and something dark flickered across his face. Get this man away from her, now. Sir, I'm performing CPR. I don't care what you think you're doing. Doyle's lip curled into a sneer. Security. 2 guards materialized from nowhere, hands reaching for Eli's arms. No! Eli twisted away, his voice raw. You can't stop compressions. You'll kill her. You're the one killing her, Doyle roared. You're a janitor. You're not qualified to. I'm certified. I know what I'm doing. Certified? Doyle laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. You push a mop for a living. Get him out of here. The guards grabbed Eli's shoulders, started to drag him back. His hands broke contact with Juliana's chest, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. No, 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 no! And then Juliana Reed's body convulsed. Everyone froze. Her back arched off the floor, her mouth opening in a desperate, rattling gasp. Her eyes flew open, wild, unfocused, alive, and her hands clawed at the air as if she were drowning. Eli broke free from the guards and dropped beside her, his hands steadying her shoulders. You're okay. You're okay. Breathe. Just breathe. She gasped again, her chest heaving, color slowly flooding back into her cheeks. Her eyes, a startling shade of gray, locked onto his face. Who? The word came out as a whisper, broken and confused. Who are you? Eli opened his mouth to answer, But before he could speak, Harper Doyle's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Get him out! Now!" The guards didn't hesitate this time. They grabbed Eli under the arms and hauled him to his feet, dragging him backward toward the door as Juliana watched, her eyes still dazed, still searching. "Wait," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "Wait, he was helping." But the words were lost in the chaos of voices, board members calling for doctors, assistants calling for lawyers, and Harper Doyle standing over Juliana like a vulture over carrion, his face arranged into a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. The last thing Eli saw before the elevator doors closed was Juliana Reed, propped up against a chair leg, her hand raised in his direction, as if reaching for something she'd already lost. The security office smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. Eli sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects, his hands still shaking from the adrenaline dump, his back still aching from the blow he'd taken. Across from him, behind a desk cluttered with monitors and paperwork, sat a man named Torres, head of security, according to the nameplate, who was looking at Eli like he'd found something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly." Torres leaned back in his chair, his thick fingers steepled under his chin. "You're telling me you gave the CEO mouth-to-mouth resuscitation because you... what? Took a class?" "CPR certification," Eli said for the third time. "Through the Red Cross. I've renewed it twice." "And you thought that qualified you to put your hands, and your mouth, on Juliana Reed?" "She was dying. She was having a medical episode. She wasn't breathing. Her heart had stopped." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Are you a doctor now too? You don't need to be a doctor to recognize cardiac arrest." Eli's voice was harder than he intended. "Blue lips, no pulse, no respiration. Every second I waited was a second closer to brain damage. Or death." Torres was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. Then he sighed and shook his head. "Look, Barrett, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of things. And I know that sometimes people act in the moment without thinking about consequences." He paused, leaning forward. "But you need to understand your position here. You're a night shift janitor. She's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. The optics of what happened in that room. The optics?" Eli stared at him in disbelief. "I saved her life. That's not what people are going to see." Torres gestured to one of his monitors, where a frozen frame showed Eli bent over Juliana, his mouth pressed to hers. "That's what they're going to see. A janitor. A cleaning staff employee kissing the CEO while she's unconscious." Eli felt his stomach drop. That's CPR. That's rescue breathing. Anyone who's ever taken a first aid course would recognize, would they?" Torres cut him off. "Because when I look at this footage, what I see is a man who violated company policy by entering an executive meeting without authorization, who put his hands on a female executive without consent, and who, let's be honest here, took advantage of a vulnerable woman in a moment of crisis. She was dying. So you keep saying." The door behind Eli opened. He didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. The sudden drop in temperature told him everything. "Mr. Torres?" Harper Doyle's voice was silky, controlled, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I'll take it from here." Torres practically leaped out of his chair. "Of course, Mr. Doyle. I was just taking Mr. Barrett's statement. That won't be necessary." Doyle moved around the desk, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor with each step. He stopped directly in front of Eli, looking down at him the way one might examine a particularly disappointing piece of furniture. "Mr. Barrett, do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir." Eli met his gaze without flinching. "You're the CFO. I'm also the man who just watched you assault the woman who signs every paycheck in this building." Doyle's voice was quiet, almost pleasant, but his eyes were glacial. "Including yours." "I didn't assault anyone. I performed CPR. There's a difference." "Is there?" Doyle reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then held it up so Eli could see. "Because this is what's already circulating. 30 seconds of footage, no context, just you, with your mouth on hers." Eli stared at the video, grainy, clearly taken from someone's phone, showing him bent over Juliana's body. From the angle, you couldn't see her blue lips. You couldn't see her lifeless chest. All you could see was a man in a janitor's uniform pressing his face to an unconscious woman. That's not what happened. It's what people will believe happened. And in my experience, Mr. Barrett, that's the only thing that matters. Doyle pocketed his phone. You're terminated. Effective immediately. What? Your badge will be deactivated within the hour. You'll surrender your uniform and any company property before leaving the building. If you resist, security will escort you out in handcuffs. You can't. Eli rose to his feet, his heart pounding. I saved her life. I did what no one else in that room had the guts to do. What you did, Doyle said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, was put your filthy hands on something that doesn't belong to you, and now you're going to pay for it. The words hit Eli like a bucket of ice water. He understood, suddenly and completely, that this had nothing to do with what happened in that conference room. This was something else. Something personal. You know I didn't do anything wrong, he said quietly. Doyle smiled, a thin, reptilian expression that never touched his eyes. Maybe, but that's not going to matter when the story breaks tomorrow. Janitor assaults CEO during board meeting. It practically writes itself. The security footage will show, he said. The security footage will show whatever I tell it to show. Doyle's smile widened. You're a smart man, Mr. Barrett. Smart enough to know when you've lost. Eli's hands curled into fists at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to fight back, to argue, to demand justice. But he thought of Mia, waiting at home with her math book open, wondering why Daddy was late again, and the fight drained out of him like water through a sieve. Can I at least get my things? His voice was hollow. Torres will escort you to your locker. You have 10 minutes. The locker room was empty at this hour, which was a small mercy. Eli's hands trembled as he worked the combination lock, a birthday present from Mia 3 years ago, when she was just 7 and still believed her father was some kind of superhero. Inside, the locker held the sum total of his professional existence: a spare uniform, a faded photograph of Mia at her kindergarten graduation, a battered paperback novel he'd been reading during lunch breaks, and a congratulations card from his coworkers when he'd hit his 1-year anniversary at the company. To Eli, the card read, "Thanks for keeping our floors clean and our spirits high. Here's to many more years." He stuffed everything into a plastic bag except the photograph. That he slipped into his wallet, pressing it flat against the small fold of bills that represented his savings. $47 and some change. Torres stood by the door, pretending to check his phone, but clearly watching Eli's every move. You know, the security chief said without looking up, I don't actually think you did anything wrong. Eli paused, surprised. Then why? Because Harper Doyle has been waiting for an excuse to fire you for 6 months. Torres finally met his eyes. I don't know what you did to piss him off, but you've been on his list since June. June. Eli thought back, searching his memory. June was when he'd found the CFO's executive assistant crying in the stairwell, her blouse torn, her mascara running. He'd given her his jacket, called her a cab, and never spoken of it to anyone. But someone must have seen. Someone always saw. You know what's going to happen to me, Eli said. It wasn't a question. Torres nodded slowly. The story's already out. By morning, you'll be the monster who attacked Juliana Reed. No one's going to hire you, not in this city, maybe not anywhere. And there's nothing I can do. You could try to get your side of the story out. Talk to the press, maybe. But, Torres shrugged helplessly, who's going to believe a janitor over a Fortune 500 company? No one. That was the answer, and they both knew it. Eli slung the plastic bag over his shoulder and walked toward the door. He stopped beside Torres, close enough to see the guilt etched into the older man's face. If she asks, Eli said quietly, tell her I'm glad she's alive. Torres blinked. If who asks? Ms. Reed. Eli pushed through the door without looking back. Tell her I'd do it again. The walk home took 47 minutes. Eli could have taken the bus, but the night air was sharp and cold, and he needed time to think. Or maybe to stop thinking. The streets of West Philadelphia slid past him like scenes from someone else's life. The corner bodega where he bought Mia's favorite cereal, the playground where he'd taught her to ride a bike, the library where she spent Saturday mornings devouring books twice her reading level. All of it suddenly felt fragile, temporary, like a sandcastle waiting for the tide. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. No missed calls from the school nurse, no texts from the neighbor who sometimes watched Mia when his shifts ran late. Just a single notification from a news app. Breaking. Security footage shows Reed Industries employee in shocking incident with CEO. He clicked the link before he could stop himself. The article was short on facts and long on insinuation. It included the same grainy still frame that Doyle had shown him, along with quotes from anonymous sources who described the alleged assault as deeply disturbing and completely out of character for the company's normally professional environment. His name wasn't mentioned yet. Small mercy. The comments section was worse. What kind of sicko does this? Hope they throw the book at him. CEO should press charges. This is assault, plain and simple. Imagine being so entitled that you think you can just kiss your boss without consent. Eli closed the app and shoved his phone back in his pocket. His hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't adrenaline. It was something colder, heavier. He had saved a woman's life tonight. He had broken her ribs doing chest compressions. He could still feel the way they'd cracked under his palms, and breathed air into her lungs until her heart remembered how to beat. And for that act of desperate, instinctive compassion, he was going to lose everything. The apartment building loomed ahead of him, a 5-story brick structure that had seen better decades. The elevator had been broken for 3 months. The hallway lights flickered like strobes. The stairs smelled like mildew and regret. But it was home, the only one he could afford. He climbed to the 3rd floor, his legs heavy with exhaustion, and paused outside apartment 3C. Inside, he could hear the television, some animated movie Mia had probably watched 100 times, and the soft murmur of Mrs. Nguyen's voice. He took a deep breath, arranged his face into something that might pass for normal, and opened the door. "Daddy!" The impact nearly knocked him off his feet. Mia slammed into his legs with the force of a small hurricane, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressed against his stomach. At 10 years old, she was all elbows and knees and unbrushed hair, and she was the most beautiful thing Eli had ever seen. "Hey, baby girl." He bent down to scoop her up, ignoring the protest from his aching back. "You're supposed to be in bed." "Mrs. Nguyen said I could wait up." Mia pulled back to study his face, her dark eyes, her mother's eyes, narrowing with concern. "Daddy, you look tired." "Long night at work." "Did something happen?" The lie caught in his throat. He couldn't do it. Couldn't look into those trusting eyes and pretend that everything was fine when the world was crumbling around them. "Something happened," he admitted. "But we'll talk about it tomorrow, okay? Right now I need you to go to bed and get lots of sleep so you can ace that math test. But tomorrow." He kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I promise." Mia studied him for a moment longer, her small face serious beyond her years. Then she nodded and slid out of his arms. "Okay, but you have to promise to tell me everything." "I promise." She disappeared into her bedroom, a converted closet barely big enough for her twin mattress and a small bookshelf, and Eli turned to face Mrs. Nguyen. The elderly Vietnamese woman was already gathering her things, but she paused at the door. "Mr. Barrett." Her voice was soft, careful. "I saw the news." Of course she had. The whole city had probably seen it by now. "It's not what they're saying," he said. "I was trying to help her." Mrs. Nguyen nodded slowly. "I know. I can see it in your face, but the world—" She sighed, shaking her head. "The world does not always see what is true, only what it wants to believe." "I know. You're a good man, Mr. Barrett. Whatever happens, remember that. You are a good man." She left without another word, closing the door gently behind her. Eli stood in the empty living room, if you could call a space barely bigger than a closet a living room, and felt the weight of the night settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing. He had saved a woman's life, and tomorrow the world would call him a monster. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in destruction. The story broke fully by Friday morning. Janitor accused of assault on Billionaire CEO, screamed the headlines. Eli's name, his photograph, his address, all of it splashed across every local news outlet and half the national ones. The company released a statement. Reed Industries takes all allegations of inappropriate conduct seriously. The employee in question has been terminated, and we are cooperating fully with ongoing investigations. Investigations? As if he were a criminal. No one mentioned that Juliana Reed had been in cardiac arrest. No one mentioned that her heart had stopped for nearly 4 minutes. No one mentioned that she would have died. Right there on the conference room floor, surrounded by people worth more than Eli would earn in 10 lifetimes, if he hadn't shoved through the crowd and done what needed to be done. Those details didn't fit the narrative. Eli tried to find work, fast food, retail, construction, warehouses. Every application came back the same way. We've decided to go in a different direction. Or worse, we don't hire people with your kind of history. By the end of the second week, his savings were gone. By the third week, he'd pawned his watch, a gift from his father, the only thing of value he'd ever owned, for $63. It wasn't enough. The landlord came on a Tuesday, a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes who had never liked Eli in the first place. "Rent's due," he said. "You're 2 weeks behind." "I know, I just need a little more time." "Time's up." The landlord shoved a piece of paper into Eli's hands. "You got until the end of the month. After that, I'm changing the locks." Eviction notice, 30 days. Eli stared at the paper, the words blurring in front of his eyes. Behind him, he could hear Mia doing homework at the kitchen table, her pencil scratching against paper, completely unaware that her entire world was about to collapse. He had to tell her. He'd promised to tell her everything, and he'd been putting it off for weeks, hiding the newspaper clippings, changing the channel when his face appeared on the news. But he couldn't hide an eviction notice. He couldn't hide being homeless. "Mia," his voice cracked. "We need to talk." She looked up, her eyes immediately widening at his expression. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Come sit with me." They sat together on the threadbare couch, the same couch where she'd taken her first steps, where he'd read her bedtime stories, where they'd cuddled during thunderstorms. And Eli told her everything. The CPR, the firing, the false accusations, the articles and the comments, and the looks people gave him on the street. When he was done, Mia was quiet for a long time. "They're saying you hurt that lady?" "Yes." "But you didn't. You saved her." "I know, baby, but sometimes people don't see the truth. They see what they want to see." Mia processed this, her small face working through emotions too complex for a 10-year-old. Then she squared her shoulders and looked him dead in the eye. "So we make them see." Despite everything, despite the eviction notice in his hand and the empty cupboards and the future stretching out before them like a vast, terrifying void, Eli felt a surge of pride so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "How?" he asked. "I don't know yet." Mia's jaw set with determination. "But we'll figure it out, together." He pulled her into his arms and held on tight, breathing in the strawberry shampoo, memorizing the feeling of her small body pressed against his chest. "Together," he whispered. "Always together." Isham. The fever started 3 days later. At first, Eli ignored it. He had too much to do. More job applications, more phone calls, more desperate calculations trying to stretch their dwindling resources. But by the second day, he could barely stand. By the third, he couldn't get out of bed. "Daddy?" Mia's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Daddy, you're really hot." "I'm fine, sweetheart." The words scraped against his throat like sandpaper. "Just need to rest." "Should I call someone?" No, don't call anyone. Just let me sleep." He drifted in and out of consciousness, strange dreams mixing with stranger realities. He was back in the conference room, pressing down on Juliana Reed's chest, but every time he looked at her face, it was Mia staring back at him with blue lips and empty eyes. He was running through endless corridors, searching for something he'd lost, while voices echoed off the walls. Monster. Animal. What kind of sicko does this? At some point, he became aware of cold. Bone-deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep up from the floor and settle into his marrow. The heat had been shut off. When had the heat been shut off? Daddy. Mia's voice again, closer now. Daddy, please wake up. Please. He tried to open his eyes, tried to speak, but his body had become a foreign country, and he no longer knew the language. I'm calling Mrs. Nguyen. No. The word came out as barely a whisper. Don't let them see. But she was already gone, her footsteps pounding down the hallway, her voice raised in fear. And somewhere in the darkness of his fever-addled mind, Eli realized that this was how it ended. Not with a dramatic confrontation or vindication or even a trial, just a man, alone in a freezing apartment, dying of something as ordinary as the flu because he couldn't afford to see a doctor. He thought of Mia, of her determined face, of her promise that they would figure it out together. I'm sorry, he thought. I'm so sorry. The darkness swallowed him whole. 37 floors above the city, in a penthouse that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime, Juliana Reed sat alone in the dark. The doctors had cleared her 3 days after the incident. A rare cardiac event, they said, stress-induced arrhythmia that had triggered a full arrest. She was lucky to be alive. A few more minutes without intervention, and she would have suffered permanent brain damage, or worse. But no one would tell her who had intervened. Every time she asked about the board meeting, about what happened, about who had saved her life, she was met with careful deflections and changed subjects. Harper assured her that everything was under control. The board members offered condolences and well wishes. Her personal assistant brought her files and reports as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. She knew it. She could feel it, like a splinter lodged beneath her skin, too deep to see but impossible to ignore. The voice, the hands, the desperation in someone's cry, "Come on, don't do this, don't you dare do this." She remembered fragments, hands pressing on her chest, air forcing its way into her lungs, a face hovering above hers, blurry, unfocused, but undeniably present. A man's voice, rough with fear, but steady with purpose. You're okay. You're okay. Breathe. Just breathe. Who was he? The question haunted her through sleepless nights and distracted days. She found herself staring at the photographs on her desk, the carefully curated images of herself at charity galas and business summits, always smiling, always perfect, and wondering what those pictures would show if she had died. A legacy of press releases and profit margins, board meetings and bottom lines. Nothing real. Nothing that mattered. Tonight, like every night since she'd come home from the hospital, she sat by the window and watched the city lights blur through the glass. Her phone buzzed with the message from Harper, another update about quarterly projections, another reminder about tomorrow's schedule. But she didn't reach for it. Instead, she spoke aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper in the empty room. "Who are you?" The city didn't answer, but somewhere far below, in a freezing apartment in West Philadelphia, a janitor was fighting for his life, just as he had once fought for hers. And Juliana Reed, whether she knew it or not, was about to learn the truth. The sound of pounding on the door pulled Eli from the darkness, like a hand reaching into deep water. He couldn't tell how long he'd been unconscious. Minutes, hours, days. Time had become a foreign concept, measured only in the waves of fever that crashed over him and the brief moments of clarity that surfaced between them. "Mr. Barrett, Mr. Barrett, open the door." Mrs. Nguyen's voice, and another voice, younger, more frantic, more familiar. "Daddy, Daddy, please!" "Mia!" The sound of his daughter's terror cut through the fog like a knife. Eli forced his eyes open, forced his body to move, forced himself to roll off the couch and crawl toward the door on hands and knees that felt like they belonged to someone else. The lock. He needed to reach the lock. His fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, clumsy and uncooperative, until finally the mechanism clicked and the door swung inward. Mia burst through first, her small hands grabbing his face, her eyes wide with a fear no child should ever have to feel. "Daddy, you're so hot. You're burning up." "I'm okay, baby." The lie scraped against his throat. "Just need to rest." "You've been resting for 2 days. Mrs. Nguyen's face appeared above him, creased with worry. "Mr. Barrett, you need a doctor." "Can't afford a doctor." "Then we call ambulance." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. No ambulances, no hospitals. They'll ask questions. They'll take Mia. Mrs. Nguyen's expression shifted from worry to understanding, and then to something that looked almost like grief. Mr. Barrett, you will die. Then I'll die. Eli's eyes found Mia's face, and he tried to smile. But not tonight. Help me back to the couch. Between the two of them, the elderly woman and the 10-year-old girl, they managed to drag him back to the threadbare cushions. Mrs. Nguyen disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a wet cloth, pressing it against his forehead, while muttering something in Vietnamese that sounded like a prayer. Mia, you stay with him. I go get medicine from my apartment. Okay. Mia's voice was small but steady. She climbed onto the couch beside her father, pressing her body against his as if she could somehow transfer her warmth, her health, her life force into him through sheer force of will. I'm scared, Daddy. I know, sweetheart. I know. Are you going to die? The question hung in the air, impossibly heavy. Eli wanted to lie, wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, that this was just a cold, that he'd be back on his feet in no time. But looking into those dark eyes, so much like her mother's, he couldn't do it. He had promised to tell her everything. He had promised never to lie. I don't know, he said finally, but I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight as hard as I can. Like you fought for that lady? The CEO? Yes. His voice cracked. Just like that. Mia was quiet for a moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on his chest. Did you really save her life, Daddy? I did. And they fired you anyway? They did. And now everyone thinks you're a bad person? Yes. Another pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, that's not fair. Eli closed his eyes against the tears that threatened to spill. No, baby, it's not fair, but life isn't always fair. The important thing isn't what people think of you. The important thing is what you know to be true. And I know that I did the right thing, even if no one else believes it. Mrs. Nguyen returned with a handful of pills, expired antibiotics, over-the-counter fever reducers, vitamins that had probably lost their potency years ago. It wasn't much, but it was something. Eli swallowed them dry, grimacing at the bitter taste, and let himself sink back into the cushions. You rest now, Mrs. Nguyen said. I come back in a few hours to check on you. Thank you for everything. You saved Rich Lady's life. Someone should save yours too. She left, and Eli was alone with his daughter in the freezing apartment, the wind howling outside the drafty windows, the darkness pressing in from all sides. He pulled Mia closer, breathing in the strawberry scent of her hair, and made a silent promise to whatever God might be listening. Please, please let me live, not for me, for her. The fever rose and fell throughout the night like ocean tides. Sometimes Eli was aware of his surroundings, the scratchy fabric of the couch beneath him, Mia's steady breathing against his chest, the distant wail of sirens that seemed to come from another world. Other times he was lost in nightmares, trapped in an endless loop of the boardroom incident, reliving the moment of impact over and over again. In his dreams, Juliana Reed's eyes were open, staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Sometimes she was grateful. Sometimes she was accusing. And sometimes, most terrifyingly, she simply faded away, her body dissolving into mist while he screamed and clawed at empty air. When morning finally came, gray and colorless through the dirty windows, Eli was still alive. Barely. The fever had broken sometime in the night, leaving him weak as a newborn kitten, but no longer delirious. He lay on the couch for a long time, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, taking inventory of his body. Everything hurt. His muscles ached from days of tension and trembling. His head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain that seemed to pulse behind his eyes. But he could think. He could move. He could survive. Mia was still curled against him, her face peaceful in sleep. He watched her breathe, in and out, and felt something that might have been hope spark in his chest. They had made it through the night. Now they just had to make it through everything else. The eviction notice was still on the kitchen counter where he'd left it, the deadline looming like a guillotine blade. 10 days. He had 10 days to find money he didn't have, to get a job no one would give him, to somehow rebuild a life that had been systematically destroyed. It seemed impossible. And yet, looking at his daughter's sleeping face, Eli knew he had to try. He spent the morning on his laptop, a battered, second-hand machine that took 5 minutes to boot up, scouring job listings and sending applications into the void. Each one felt like throwing a message in a bottle into an endless ocean. No response, no acknowledgement, just silence, stretching out before him like a desert. By noon, his inbox was still empty except for spam. By evening, he had applied to 47 positions and received 0 callbacks. By the time Mrs. Wien came to check on him, bringing a container of homemade pho that smelled like heaven, Eli had run out of new places to apply. "You look better," she said, studying his face. "Still sick, but better." "I feel better. Thank you for the medicine." It was nothing. She set the soup on the counter and turned to face him, her expression grave. "Mr. Barrett, I have to tell you something." His stomach dropped. "What is it?" "Your landlord. He came today while you were sleeping. He say he not waiting until end of month. He say you have until Sunday." "Sunday?" Eli's voice cracked. "That's 4 days." "He say you are liability. That newspaper people come asking about you. He doesn't want trouble." Of course the landlord would kick them out early. Of course the world would find one more way to twist the knife. "Did he say what happens if we don't leave?" Mrs. Nguyen's face told him everything he needed to know. "I understand." Eli's voice was hollow. "Thank you for telling me." "Mr. Barrett." She hesitated, then reached out and touched his arm. "You can stay with me. You and Mia. My apartment is small, but we make room." The kindness nearly broke him. This woman, this elderly immigrant who had come to America with nothing and built a life through sheer determination, was offering to share what little she had with a man the world had labeled a monster. "I can't ask you to do that. You not asking. I am offering." "Mrs. Nguyen, you are a good man," she said firmly. "I know this. My daughter was nurse for 30 years. I know what CPR looks like. What you did in that video, that was not assault. That was trying to save life." Eli felt his throat constrict. "You believe me?" "Of course I believe you. Only question is, when will everyone else?" That night, after Mia had gone to bed and the apartment had fallen silent, Eli sat at the kitchen table and stared at his phone. The news alerts had slowed down over the past week, the story fading from front pages as newer scandals took its place. But the damage was done. His name would live forever in Google searches, a permanent digital scar that would follow him wherever he went. He scrolled through the articles one more time, masochistic compulsion driving him to read every word. Most repeated the same narrative: troubled janitor, inappropriate conduct, company's decisive response. But one article, buried at the bottom of his search results, caught his attention. It was an opinion piece from a small independent website, written by someone named Sarah Chen. The headline read, "The janitor they're calling a monster might just be a hero." Eli's heart stopped. He clicked the link and started reading. While mainstream media has rushed to condemn Eli Barrett based on a 30-second video clip, the article began, a closer examination of the facts raises serious questions about the official narrative. Multiple medical experts consulted for this piece confirmed that the footage shows textbook CPR technique, including rescue breaths. Furthermore, an anonymous source within Reed Industries claims that CEO Juliana Reed was in full cardiac arrest at the time of the incident, a detail conspicuously absent from all company statements. The article went on to question the company's motives, to highlight inconsistencies in the official timeline, and to call for a full investigation into what actually happened that night. It wasn't a vindication, not yet, but it was something. A crack in the wall. A voice in the wilderness saying what Eli had been screaming all along. Someone believed him. He read the article 3 more times, memorizing each word, clinging to it like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. Then he scrolled down to the comments section, bracing himself for the usual vitriol. Instead, he found something unexpected. Mixed among the hateful messages were others, dozens of them, from people who had doubts about the official story. "This doesn't add up," one commenter wrote. "If he was really assaulting her, Why did they wait until she regained consciousness to drag him away? Another said, I've taken CPR classes. That video looks exactly like rescue breathing. Why isn't anyone asking the real questions? And at the bottom, posted just 3 hours ago, a comment that made Eli's breath catch in his throat. I was there that night. I was in that conference room. And I can tell you that this man saved Juliana Reed's life while everyone else stood there like statues. I've been too afraid to speak up because I didn't want to lose my job. But I can't stay silent anymore. The truth needs to come out. Someone had seen. Someone knew. For the first time in weeks, Eli allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the tide was beginning to turn. 3 blocks away, in an apartment building that looked almost identical to Eli's, a 26-year-old woman named Rebecca Torres sat at her own laptop, staring at the comment she had just posted. Her hands were shaking. Rebecca had been an administrative assistant at Reed Industries for 3 years, long enough to know where all the bodies were buried, as the saying went. She had been in the conference room that night, taking notes for the emergency board meeting, when Juliana Reed collapsed. She had watched the whole thing unfold, the chaos, the screaming, the janitor pushing through the crowd like a man possessed. And she had watched Harper Doyle orchestrate the cover-up. She had seen him grab the security guard's phone, deleting the video that showed the full context of what happened. She had heard him whispering to the board members, coaching them on what to say when the press came calling. She had watched him smile, actually smile, when the first headlines hit, as if this were all part of some grand plan. Rebecca didn't know why Harper hated Eli Barrett. She had her suspicions. She remembered the incident with his assistant in June, the way the woman had disappeared from the company shortly afterward. But she couldn't prove anything. All she knew for certain was that an innocent man was being destroyed, and she had the power to stop it, if she was willing to risk everything. Her cursor hovered over the delete button for a long moment. One click, and the comment would vanish. She could go back to her normal life, keep her head down, pretend she hadn't seen anything. But then she thought about Eli Barrett's face in that viral video, the desperation, the determination, the complete disregard for his own safety as he fought to save a woman's life. She thought about her own father, who had worked as a janitor for 30 years, who had taught her that a person's job title didn't define their worth. She pulled her hand away from the mouse. The comment stayed up. Across the city, in her penthouse prison, Juliana Reed was finally getting answers. It had taken 2 weeks of subtle investigation, of carefully worded questions and strategic favors called in, but she had finally obtained what she'd been looking for, the unedited security footage from the night of her cardiac arrest. Harper had done his best to make it disappear. But Juliana hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by being easily thwarted. She had her own sources, her own loyalties, her own ways of getting what she wanted. Now, sitting alone in her private office at 3 a.m, she pressed play. The video started normally enough, board members filing into the conference room, taking their seats, shuffling papers. She saw herself at the head of the table, looking tired but composed, running through the agenda with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Then, 23 minutes in, it happened. Juliana watched herself pause mid-sentence, her face draining of color. She watched herself clutch her chest, her eyes widening with fear, and then collapse sideways out of her chair like a puppet with its strings cut. The chaos that followed was almost unbearable to watch. Board members scrambling, security guards talking into radios, people shouting over each other in a cacophony of panic. And through it all, not a single person moved to help her. They stood there, these men and women who earned millions of dollars a year, who made life or death decisions about thousands of employees without batting an eye, and they watched their CEO die on the floor in front of them. Until him. Juliana leaned closer to the screen as a figure in a gray uniform pushed through the crowd. She couldn't see his face clearly from this angle, but she could see his body language, the urgency, the focus, the complete absence of hesitation as he dropped to his knees beside her. The audio was poor, but she could make out fragments of what he was saying. Move! Move! Now! And then, as he began compressions, come on, don't do this. Don't you dare do this. She watched him work, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, check for pulse, repeat. While the people around him did everything possible to stop him, she watched a security guard strike him between the shoulder blades. She watched Harper Doyle order him dragged away, and she watched herself, at the very end, reach out toward him as they hauled him into the elevator, her own hand moving without conscious thought toward the man who had saved her life. Juliana paused the video and sat in the darkness for a long time, staring at that frozen image, her hand reaching, his face barely visible through the elevator doors, a mixture of exhaustion and defeat. "Who are you?" she whispered again, just as she had whispered every night since the incident. This time, she was going to find out. The call came at 6 a.m. Juliana had spent the rest of the night making phone calls, pulling strings, demanding information that her own executives had worked hard to bury. By dawn, she had a name, an address, and a story that made her blood boil. Eli Barrett, night shift janitor, single father, CPR certified through the Red Cross, fired for inappropriate conduct the same night he had performed the act that saved her life. And now, according to the latest reports, he was facing eviction, blacklisted from employment, his reputation destroyed beyond repair, because he had the audacity to not look away. Juliana Reed had built her career on calculated decisions, on weighing costs and benefits, on never letting emotion cloud her judgment. But as she read through the file on Eli Barrett, his employment records, his background check, the glowing performance reviews from supervisors who praised his work ethic and reliability, something inside her cracked. This man had nothing, no money, no connections, no power of any kind. And yet, when everyone else in that room had frozen, he had acted. He had risked everything, his job, his reputation, his freedom, for a woman he had never met. When was the last time anyone had done something like that for her? When was the last time she had done something like that for anyone? The questions burned in her chest as she reached for her phone. "Margaret?" Her assistant answered on the second ring, despite the early hour. "I need a car." "Of course, Ms. Reed. Where would you like to go?" Juliana looked down at the address scrawled on the notepad in front of her. West Philadelphia, a neighborhood she had never visited, in a part of the city she had spent her entire life pretending didn't exist. "I'm going to right a wrong," she said, "and I need to do it now." The Blacktown car rolled through streets that seemed to belong to a different planet. Juliana stared out the tinted windows at boarded-up storefronts and crumbling sidewalks, at men huddled around barrel fires and women pushing shopping carts filled with everything they owned. This was Philadelphia, too, the same city where she lived in a penthouse that cost more than these people would see in a lifetime. But it might as well have been another country. How had she never seen this before? The car stopped in front of a 5-story brick building that looked like it had been tired since the day it was built. Graffiti covered the lower walls. Trash piled in the entryway. A broken window on the 3rd floor was covered with cardboard and duct tape. "Are you sure about this, Ms. Reed?" Her driver's voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the concern underneath. "Wait here," she said, and stepped out of the car before she could change her mind. The lobby smelled like mildew and something else she couldn't identify. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there for years. Juliana climbed the stairs, her designer heels clicking against concrete that hadn't been swept in months, until she reached the 3rd floor. Apartment 3C. She knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard footsteps, slow, shuffling, unsteady, and the door cracked open. The man who looked out at her was barely recognizable from the figure in the security footage. His face was gaunt, his skin pale, his eyes sunken with exhaustion and illness. He looked like someone who had been fighting a battle he knew he couldn't win. But when those eyes met hers, something sparked in their depths. Recognition, confusion, and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "Ms. Reed?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "What are you... How did you..." I watched the footage. The words came out harder than she intended, sharp with weeks of suppressed emotion. The real footage. "I saw what you did. I saw what they did to you." Eli Barrett stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, his legs buckled. Juliana caught him before he hit the ground, her arms wrapping around his too thin frame, lowering him gently to the floor. His skin was burning hot, fever, she realized, the kind of fever that could kill if left untreated. "Daddy!" A small figure appeared in the doorway behind them. A girl. maybe 10 years old, with dark eyes wide with terror. She looked at Juliana with a mixture of suspicion and hope, as if unsure whether this stranger was salvation or another form of disaster. "Is your father sick?" Juliana asked, keeping her voice calm. "He's been sick for days. He won't go to the hospital because he says they'll take me away." "They're not going to take you anywhere." Juliana pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. "I need an ambulance at this address immediately. This is Juliana Reed." "Yes, that Juliana Reed. Send your best team. Now." Eli's hand grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Please," he rasped. "Mia, don't let them separate us." Juliana looked down at him. This man who had saved her life, who was now delirious with fever, whose only concern was for his daughter. "I won't," she said. "I promise you. I won't let anyone hurt your family. Not anymore." The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. A new record, the paramedics would later say, though they didn't mention that they had broken approximately 4 traffic laws to get there after hearing who had made the call. Juliana rode in the back with Eli, holding his hand as the paramedics worked, watching his vital signs fluctuate on the monitors above. Mia sat beside her, small and silent, refusing to let go of her father's other hand even when the EMTs gently suggested she move. "He saved my life," Juliana said quietly, to no one in particular. "He's a hero, and I let them destroy him." One of the paramedics glanced at her, then quickly looked away. He had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. But looking at this scene, the billionaire CEO clutching the hand of a fevered janitor, a little girl crying silent tears in the corner, it was hard to reconcile it with the narrative that had played out in the media. "He's going to be okay," the paramedic said finally. "It's pneumonia, probably bacterial. Treatable, but it's good you called when you did. Another few days without treatment." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The hospital was chaos from the moment they arrived. News of Juliana Reed's presence spread like wildfire through the building, bringing administrators and publicists and security personnel swarming like bees to honey. She ignored them all, following the gurney that carried Eli Barrett into the emergency room, refusing to leave his side even when a officious-looking man in a suit tried to steer her toward a private waiting area. "Ms. Reed, please, the media attention." "I don't care about the media." Her voice cracked like a whip. "This man saved my life. I'm not leaving him." The administrator opened his mouth to argue, took one look at her expression, and wisely retreated. They admitted Eli to a private room, Juliana insisted, and offered to cover all expenses, and began pumping him full of antibiotics and fluids. Mia curled up in a chair by his bed, her hand still clutching his, her eyes never leaving his face. Juliana stood by the window, watching the sun rise over Philadelphia, and felt something shift inside her. Something fundamental. Something that had been dormant for so long she had forgotten it existed. For 25 years she had built her empire on one simple principle: never let anyone get close enough to hurt you. Trust was weakness. Vulnerability was failure. The only things you could depend on were contracts and quarterly earnings reports. But Eli Barrett hadn't thought about contracts when he pushed through that crowd. He hadn't calculated the risk-benefit ratio before dropping to his knees beside her dying body. He had simply acted because it was the right thing to do. When was the last time she had done something simply because it was right? The question haunted her as the hours passed, as doctors came and went, as Eli's fever slowly broke and his breathing steadied. It haunted her as she made phone calls to her lawyers, her publicists, her board of directors. It haunted her as she drafted statements and reviewed security footage and built a case that would exonerate Eli Barrett once and for all. By noon, she was ready. By evening, the world would know the truth. But first she had to make another call, one that she had been dreading all day. She stepped into the hallway, found a quiet corner, and dialed Harper Doyle's private number. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Juliana, I've been trying to reach you all morning. Where are you?" "I'm at Temple University Hospital." A pause. "Are you ill? Do you need me to send someone?" "I'm not ill, Harper. I'm here with Eli Barrett." Silence. Long, heavy, pregnant with implication. "I see." When Harper spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "And why, exactly, are you with the man who assaulted you?" "He didn't assault me." He saved my life. And you know it. Juliana, I understand you're grateful for what you perceive as... I've seen the footage, Harper. She cut him off, her voice cold as ice. The real footage. All of it, including the parts you tried to delete. Another silence, longer this time. When Harper finally spoke, all pretense of warmth had vanished from his voice. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you to handle this situation. That ends now. Think very carefully about what you're doing, Juliana. This man is a liability, a public relations nightmare. If you try to rehabilitate his reputation, it will drag the company. The company will survive. It always does. Juliana's grip tightened on the phone. But I'm not sure you will. Not after I tell the board what really happened that night. You wouldn't. Watch me. She hung up before he could respond, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just declared war on the second most powerful person in her company, a man who had spent years building alliances and accumulating leverage, who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had buried most of them himself. It was the most reckless thing she had ever done, and it felt absolutely right. When she returned to Eli's room, he was awake. His eyes were clearer now, the fever brightness faded to something more like normal exhaustion. He was propped up against pillows, one hand still holding Mia's, the other clutching a cup of water that a nurse had brought earlier. Miss Reed. His voice was still hoarse, but stronger than before. I don't understand. Why are you here? Juliana pulled a chair over to his bedside and sat down, meeting his eyes directly. Because I owe you everything, and because I've done you a terrible wrong. You didn't do anything. It was Doyle, it was the board, it was my company. The words came out harder than she intended. My company, my employees, my responsibility. I should have asked questions. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I let them tell me what happened, and I believed them because it was easier than searching for the truth. Eli was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do. Juliana leaned forward, her voice dropping. You had nothing to gain by saving me. Nothing. You weren't trying to get a promotion or a bonus or a favor. You just acted because it was the right thing to do. It's what anyone would have done. No. She shook her head firmly. It's not. I was in that room for 4 minutes before you arrived. 4 minutes. Surrounded by people who have known me for years, who call themselves my colleagues and friends. Not one of them lifted a finger to help me. Not one. Eli's jaw tightened. They were scared. They were cowards, there's a difference. Juliana reached out and took his free hand, surprising herself with the gesture. You're not a coward, Eli Barrett. You're the bravest person I've ever met, and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows it. Before he could respond, the door to the room burst open. A woman stood in the doorway, young, professional, her face flushed with a mixture of fear and determination. Juliana recognized her after a moment, Rebecca Torres, an administrative assistant who had been with the company for 3 years. Ms. Reed, Rebecca's voice trembled slightly. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see. She held out her phone, the screen displaying a social media post that had gone viral in the past hour. It was the same opinion article that Eli had found the night before, but now it had been shared thousands of times, accompanied by a hashtag that was currently trending nationally. #Justice for Eli Barrett. It's everywhere, Rebecca said. People are demanding answers. They're calling for an investigation, and... She hesitated, glancing at Eli. I posted a comment last night, anonymous, about what really happened. It's gotten a lot of attention. Juliana looked at the young woman, at the fear in her eyes warring with something stronger, conviction maybe, or simple human decency. You were there, Juliana said softly. In the conference room. Rebecca nodded. I saw everything. I saw Mr. Barrett save your life. I saw Mr. Doyle. I saw what he did afterward. She swallowed hard. I've been afraid to speak up, afraid of losing my job. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when an innocent man is being destroyed. Juliana stood up, walked over to Rebecca, and did something that surprised them both. She hugged her. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for being brave when I wasn't. When she pulled back, Rebecca's eyes were shining with tears. What do we do now? Juliana looked at Eli, at Mia, at Rebecca, at the small army of truth that had somehow assembled in this hospital room. Then she smiled, a real smile, the first one she had felt in weeks. Now, she said, we burn it all down. The press conference was scheduled for 6 o'clock that evening. Juliana had spent the afternoon on the phone with her lawyers, her publicists, her most trusted board members. She had compiled evidence, drafted statements, prepared for every possible question. She had also quietly initiated an investigation into Harper Doyle's conduct, not just regarding Eli Barrett, but regarding a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. The conference room at Reed Industries headquarters was packed with reporters, cameras, microphones. The same room where, 3 weeks earlier, Juliana had collapsed and Eli Barrett had saved her life. She stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and took a deep breath. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I'm here today to set the record straight about an incident that occurred at this company 3 weeks ago, and about the man who has been falsely accused of assault ever since. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. On the night of November 15th, I suffered a cardiac arrest during a board meeting. For approximately 4 minutes, my heart stopped beating. During that time, every person in this room, executives, board members, security personnel, stood by and did nothing. The murmur grew louder. Every person except one, a night shift janitor named Eli Barrett, who pushed through the crowd, dropped to his knees beside me, and performed CPR until my heart started beating again. He saved my life. And for that act of heroism, this company fired him, blacklisted him, and allowed a false narrative to spread that destroyed his reputation and nearly cost him everything. She paused, letting the words sink in. I am here today to apologize to Mr. Barrett for allowing this injustice to occur under my watch, to his daughter, who has suffered alongside him, to everyone who believed the lies we told, because it was easier than facing the truth. A reporter's hand shot up. Ms. Reed, are you saying that the company deliberately covered up what happened? I'm saying that certain individuals within this company made decisions that prioritized reputation over justice. Those individuals will be held accountable. She glanced to her left, where Harper Doyle sat in the front row, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Effective immediately, Harper Doyle is terminated from his position as Chief Financial Officer pending a full investigation into his conduct. The room erupted. Questions flew from every direction. Cameras flashed in a blinding strobe. Harper Doyle stood up, his face purple with fury, and pushed his way toward the exit, only to find 2 security guards blocking his path. You can't do this, he snarled at Juliana. You have no idea what you've started. On the contrary, Juliana's voice was calm, controlled, utterly unruffled. I know exactly what I've started. The truth. She turned back to the reporters. Mr. Barrett will be receiving a formal apology from this company, along with compensation for the damages he has suffered. His name will be cleared, his record expunged, and anyone who participated in the campaign to destroy his reputation will face appropriate consequences. Miss Reed! A reporter's voice cut through the chaos. Where's Mr. Barrett now? Can we speak with him? Juliana smiled. Mr. Barrett is currently recovering from an illness at Temple University Hospital. He has asked me to convey the following message. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. Handwritten in Eli's shaky scrawl, dictated to her that afternoon while Mia sat beside him and corrected his spelling. I did what anyone would do when they see another person in danger. I don't need an apology or compensation. I just need people to know the truth. And I hope that the next time someone collapses in a room full of people, nobody will hesitate the way they did that night. Because every second matters. Every single second. The room fell silent. Juliana folded the paper and tucked it back into her pocket. That's the kind of man Eli Barrett is. The kind who thinks about others, even when the world has given him every reason to think only of himself. The kind who does what's right, even when it costs him everything. She looked directly into the cameras. He's the kind of man this company should aspire to be. And starting today, we will. The aftermath of the press conference was like watching a dam break. News outlets that had spent weeks vilifying Eli Barrett scrambled to reframe their coverage. Opinion pieces praising his heroism replaced the ones condemning him. The hashtag Justice for Eli Barrett exploded across social media, joined by hashtag Healthcare for Heroes and Protect Good Samaritans. In his hospital room, Eli watched it all unfold on the small television mounted to the wall, Mia curled against his side, Mrs. Nguyen sitting in the chair by the window. "Daddy, you're famous," Mia said, her voice filled with wonder. "I'm not famous." Eli's voice was hoarse. I'm just me. You're a hero." Mrs. Nguyen's eyes were bright with tears. "I told you, good man." Eli didn't know how to respond to that. For 3 weeks he had been a monster, a predator, a cautionary tale about what happens when someone from the wrong side of the tracks dares to touch someone important. And now, in the span of a single afternoon, he had become something else entirely. He wasn't sure which version of himself was harder to believe. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Barrett, this is Juliana Reed. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow if you're feeling well enough. We have much to discuss. Jr." Eli stared at the message for a long moment. Then, slowly, he typed a response. "Tomorrow works. Thank you for everything." Her reply came almost instantly. "Don't thank me yet. I'm just getting started." He put down the phone and looked at his daughter, at the hope shining in her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Mia," he said softly, "I think things are going to be okay." "I know, Daddy." She snuggled closer. "I knew they would be, because you're a good person, and good people win in the end." Eli wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that the universe rewarded kindness and punished cruelty, that truth always triumphed over lies, that doing the right thing would eventually lead to the right outcome. But he had seen too much of the world to believe in fairy tales. What he did believe in was his daughter, her determination, her faith, her stubborn insistence that the world could be better than it was. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. He closed his eyes, Mia's warmth against his side, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he slept without nightmares. Outside the window, the lights of Philadelphia sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet. The same view that had seemed so cold and distant from the 37th floor of Reed Industries headquarters. But from here, at ground level, surrounded by people who had chosen to believe in him, the lights looked different. They looked like hope. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds in pale golden stripes, painting patterns across Eli's face as he slowly opened his eyes. For a moment he didn't know where he was. The ceiling was too white. The bed was too soft. The air smelled like antiseptic and clean linens instead of mildew and desperation. Then memory returned in a flood, and he sat up so quickly his head spun. "Easy, Daddy." Mia's voice came from somewhere to his left. "The doctor said you need to rest." He turned to find his daughter sitting in the same chair she'd occupied for the past 2 days, a worn paperback book open in her lap. Her hair was tangled, her clothes rumpled, but her eyes were bright with something that looked almost like peace. "How long was I asleep?" 12 hours. Mia set down her book and climbed onto the edge of his bed, careful not to jostle the IV line still attached to his arm. "Ms. Reed came by last night while you were sleeping. She left you something." She pointed to the bedside table, where a thick manila envelope sat propped against a vase of flowers. Eli reached for it with trembling fingers, sliding out a sheaf of documents that made his breath catch in his throat. The first page was a formal letter of apology from Reed Industries, signed by Juliana Reed herself. The second was a check for an amount so large that Eli had to count the zeros 3 times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. The third was a stack of printed news articles, each one telling the same story. Janitor hailed as hero after CEO clears his name, and at the bottom, handwritten on cream-colored stationery, a note. "Mr. Barrett, this is the beginning, not the end. I'll see you at 2 p.m. Juliana Eli stared at the note for a long moment, trying to reconcile the words on the page with the reality of his situation. 3 days ago, he had been dying in a freezing apartment, blacklisted from every job in the city, watching his daughter's future crumble around them. Now he was holding more money than he'd ever seen in his life. His name was trending on social media for the right reasons, and the most powerful woman in Philadelphia wanted to meet with him. It felt like a dream, The kind of dream you were afraid to believe in because waking up would hurt too much. Daddy? Mia's voice was soft. Are you okay? I don't know, sweetheart. He set down the papers and pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. I honestly don't know. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the hospital's private conference room, a space typically reserved for family consultations about terminal diagnoses and end-of-life care. Today, it had been transformed into something else entirely. A war room, scattered with documents and laptops, and the remnants of what appeared to be a very long night. Juliana Reed stood by the window when Eli entered, silhouetted against the afternoon light like a figure from a painting. She was dressed in simple clothes, black slacks and a white blouse. Nothing like the designer suits he'd seen her wear in company newsletters. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her face, without makeup, looked softer than he remembered, more human. Mr. Barrett, she turned as he approached, and he was struck again by her eyes, that startling shade of gray that seemed to see right through him. Thank you for coming. Thank you for... He gestured vaguely at the room, at the flowers, at the check still folded in his pocket. For everything. I don't know how to begin to Don't. She held up a hand. Please don't thank me. What I did, what I'm doing now, it's not generosity. It's penance. There's a difference. She gestured to a chair across from hers, and they sat facing each other like two generals negotiating a ceasefire. I've spent the last 48 hours learning everything I can about you, Mr. Barrett. Your employment history, your background, the circumstances of your divorce, your daughter's school records. She paused, watching his face. I hope that doesn't feel like an invasion of privacy. Should it? Probably. But I needed to understand who you are. What kind of man pushes through a crowd of executives to save a woman he's never met? Eli shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I told you, it's what anyone would have done. And I told you that's not true. Juliana leaned forward, her gray eyes intense. I've built this company from nothing. I've hired thousands of people, evaluated hundreds of leaders, made countless decisions about who to trust and who to fire. In all that time, I've met exactly 3 people who would have done what you did that night. 3? You're number 3. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. The first was my father, who died when I was 22. The second was a woman named Helen, who taught me everything I know about business and passed away last year. I'm sorry. Don't be. They lived well. They died knowing they had made a difference. She paused, studying him. The point is, Mr. Barrett, that men like you are rare. Rare enough that when I find one, I don't want to let him go. Eli felt a knot forming in his stomach. What do you mean? Juliana stood and walked to the window, her back to him. Reed Industries employs over 12,000 people. Janitors, secretaries, warehouse workers, accountants, executives. Most of them come to work every day, do their jobs, and go home. They don't think about the company beyond their paycheck. They don't care about anyone except themselves. She turned to face him. But some of them, the ones at the bottom especially, struggle. They work 2 jobs and still can't make rent. They get sick and can't afford doctors. They have children who go to underfunded schools and face a future that looks exactly like their present. And until 3 weeks ago, I never thought about them at all. That's not unusual, Eli said quietly. People at the top rarely think about people at the bottom. No, but it should be unusual. It should be unacceptable. Juliana's voice hardened. When I watched that security footage, when I saw my own executives stand there and watch me die, I realized something. This company that I built, this empire I've spent my entire life creating, it's hollow. It's a machine that generates profit, but it doesn't care about people. It doesn't value human life. She walked back to her chair and sat down, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. I want to change that, and I want you to help me. Eli blinked. I'm sorry? I want to create a new position at Reed Industries, Director of Employee Welfare, someone whose job is to look after the people who get overlooked, the janitors, the warehouse workers, the single parents working double shifts, someone who can identify problems before they become crises, who can advocate for people who don't have a voice. And you want me to... What? Consult on it? No. Juliana's eyes met his. I want you to do it. The silence that followed was so complete that Eli could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Ms. Reed, I'm a janitor. I push a mop for a living. I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about corporate policy or employee benefits or—" "You know how to see people." Juliana cut him off. "You know what it's like to struggle. You know what it feels like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be treated like you don't matter. That's more valuable than any MBA. But I'm not qualified. Then we'll get you qualified. Training, education, whatever you need. The point isn't what you know right now. The point is who you are." She leaned back in her chair. "I've spent 30 years surrounded by people who have all the right credentials and none of the right instincts. I'd rather have someone with the right instincts and work on the credentials." Eli stared at her, his mind racing. This was insane. This was completely, utterly insane. 3 days ago, he had been facing eviction. Now the CEO of a Fortune 500 company was offering him a job that didn't even exist yet, asking him to help reshape the culture of an organization with a larger population than many small towns. "Why me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "There must be hundreds of people more qualified, more experienced." "Probably, but none of them saved my life." Juliana's voice softened. "When my heart stopped, Eli, I was dead. For 4 minutes, I was gone. And in those 4 minutes, while everyone else stood there frozen, you fought for me. You broke my ribs doing compressions. Did you know that? 3 of them. Cracked clean through." Eli winced. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Those broken ribs are the reason I'm still breathing." She reached across the table and took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You gave me a second chance at life. Now I want to give you a second chance too. Not because I owe you, but because you deserve it. Because the world needs more people like you, not fewer." Eli looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her manicured fingers and his calloused palms. 2 people from different worlds, connected by a moment of crisis that had changed everything. "Can I think about it?" he asked finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Juliana released his hand and stood. "But there's something else we need to discuss first." "What's that?" "Harper Doyle." The name hit Eli like a splash of cold water. "What about him?" Juliana's expression hardened. "He's not going to let this go. The press conference humiliated him. His career is destroyed, and men like Harper don't accept defeat gracefully." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you need to be careful, you and Mia both." She walked to the conference table and picked up a folder, handing it to him. "This is everything we found on Harper so far. His connections, his methods, his history. Some of it is disturbing." Eli opened the folder and began reading. The first few pages were personnel files, performance reviews, the kind of corporate documentation he'd seen before. But then the content shifted, becoming darker. Complaints from female employees settled out of court, suspicious departures of people who had crossed him, a pattern of behavior that stretched back years, carefully hidden behind a veneer of professionalism. And then, near the back, a name that made his blood run cold. Sarah Chen, the administrative assistant from June, the woman he'd found crying in the stairwell with her blouse torn. He did this to her? Eli's voice was barely audible. "We don't know for certain. She refused to press charges, and the company paid her a settlement to keep quiet." Juliana's jaw tightened. "But based on the pattern, based on what we've uncovered, yes, I believe he did." Eli closed the folder, his hands trembling with a rage he could barely contain. "And he's been doing this for years? Getting away with it?" Harper is very good at protecting himself. He cultivates allies, gathers information, makes himself indispensable. Until now, no one has been willing to stand against him. She paused. "That's another reason I want you on my team, Eli, because you're not afraid to do what's right, even when it costs you everything." "But I lost," Eli said bitterly. "He destroyed me. If you hadn't come to find me, you would have found another way." Juliana's voice was certain. "Men like you don't stay down. They get knocked down, yes, but they get back up every single time." Eli wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that he was the kind of person she seemed to think he was. But the past 3 weeks had taken something from him, something he wasn't sure he could get back. "What happens now?" he asked. With Harper, I mean. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss the investigation. Based on what we've found, he'll face criminal charges for harassment, obstruction of justice, and possibly fraud. She paused. But he has powerful friends, Eli. People who owe him favors. This isn't over yet. So what do? We be careful. We be smart. And we don't let him win. Juliana walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. Yes? Your neighbor, Mrs. Nguyen. A slight smile crossed her face. I understand she has some health issues that have gone untreated for years. Eli's throat tightened. She won't need to afford anything. I've arranged for her to see a specialist at Jefferson Hospital. Full coverage, no questions asked. Juliana opened the door. Consider it a down payment on the new direction this company is taking. She was gone before Eli could respond, leaving him alone in the conference room with a folder full of darkness and a heart full of something that felt almost like hope. That evening, Eli was discharged from the hospital with a clean bill of health, a bag full of medication, and a future that looked completely different from the one he had imagined 3 days before. A car was waiting for them outside, black and sleek and clearly expensive. The driver, a serious-looking man in a dark suit, held the door open as Eli and Mia approached. Mr. Barrett, Ms. Reed arranged for me to take you to your new accommodations. New accommodations? Eli exchanged a confused glance with Mia. We're going home. I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. Your previous residence there's been some damage. Damage? What kind of damage? The driver's expression remained carefully neutral. I think it would be better if you spoke with Ms. Reed about that directly. In the meantime, she's arranged for you and your daughter to stay at a property the company maintains for visiting executives. Eli wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, but Mia's hand slipped into his and squeezed gently. It's okay, Daddy, she said quietly. Let's just go. He looked down at his daughter, at the trust in her eyes, and felt his resistance crumble. She had been through so much already. The least he could do was give her a few nights in a place that didn't smell like mildew and broken dreams. Okay, he said. Take us there. What? The property turned out to be a 3-bedroom apartment in a luxury high-rise in Center City, the kind of building Eli had only ever seen from the outside while pushing his cleaning cart through the streets. The lobby was all marble and glass, staffed by doormen in crisp uniforms who greeted them with practiced smiles. The elevator was silent and smooth, whisking them up to the 15th floor in seconds. The apartment itself was bigger than any place Eli had ever lived. Hardwood floors gleamed under soft lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Philadelphia skyline. The kitchen was fully stocked, the bedrooms were impeccably furnished, and a note on the counter informed them that anything they needed could be ordered through the building's concierge service. Mia wandered through the rooms with wide eyes, touching everything as if to confirm it was real. Daddy, look! There's a bathtub big enough to swim in. Don't get too comfortable, Eli called after her. But there was no force behind the words. How could he tell his daughter not to enjoy something she'd never had before? His phone buzzed with a text from Juliana. I hope the apartment is satisfactory. There's something we need to discuss about your old building. Call me when you're settled. Eli waited until Mia was occupied with exploring her new bedroom before dialing the number. Juliana answered on the second ring. Mr. Barrett, how's the apartment? It's, overwhelming, but thank you. What happened to my building? A pause. Someone set fire to your apartment last night. The damage was contained, but your unit is uninhabitable. Eli felt the floor tilt beneath him. Fire? The police are investigating, but based on the evidence, it wasn't an accident. Someone wanted to send a message. Harper. We can't prove that. Not yet. But yes, that's my assumption. Juliana's voice hardened. This is why I wanted you in a secure building, Eli. Harper isn't going to stop just because he's been fired. He's going to fight back, and he's going to fight dirty. But if the police are investigating the police will do what they can. But Harper has connections everywhere. He'll have an alibi, witnesses who'll swear he was somewhere else. The only way to truly stop him is to remove his power completely. How do we do that? By building something he can't tear down. by showing the world that this company is bigger than any one person, that it stands for something real. She paused. That's why I need you, Eli. You represent everything Harper isn't, everything this company should be. Eli walked to the window and looked out at the city, at the glittering lights that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Harper Doyle was plotting his next move. Somewhere out there, a burned-out apartment was being picked over by investigators. And somewhere out there, Mrs. Wynne was probably sitting alone in her own apartment, wondering if the fire had been her fault somehow. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'm sorry?" "The job. Director of Employee Welfare." He turned away from the window. "I'll do it. Not because I think I'm qualified, or because I want the money, or because I owe you anything. I'll do it because Harper Doyle needs to lose. And because there are thousands of people like me in that company who deserve someone fighting for them." Silence on the other end of the line, then softly, "Thank you, Eli." "Don't thank me yet. I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither did I when I started this company. You learn." A hint of warmth entered her voice. "We'll figure it out together." The next morning, Eli woke to the smell of bacon. For a moment, he was disoriented again, the unfamiliar ceiling and soft sheets throwing him off balance. Then he heard Mia's laughter from the kitchen, followed by another voice, deeper and more measured. He threw on a robe and padded down the hallway to find an unexpected scene. Mia standing at the stove, spatula in hand, while Rebecca Torres, the young administrative assistant from the hospital, coached her through the finer points of not burning breakfast. "A little more to the left, now flip. Perfect." Rebecca clapped her hands as Mia successfully transferred a pancake to a waiting plate. "You're a natural." "What's going on here?" Eli asked, his voice rough with sleep. Both women turned to look at him. Mia grinned. "Rebecca's teaching me how to make pancakes. She came over to check on us." "Ms. Reed asked me to stop by," Rebecca explained, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "She thought you might have questions about the company, the job, the investigation. And honestly, I wanted to see how you were doing." Eli accepted a cup of coffee from his daughter and settled into a chair at the kitchen island. "I have about 1,000 questions. But let's start with the most important one. Is Harper Doyle going to prison?" Rebecca's expression sobered. "That's complicated. The board voted last night to launch a full investigation, but Harper has lawyers, good ones, and he's already started spinning his version of events." "What version?" "That Ms. Reed is having some kind of breakdown, that she's been under too much stress since the cardiac arrest and isn't thinking clearly." Rebecca shook her head. "He's framing himself as the victim, the loyal CFO who's being scapegoated by a CEO who can't accept responsibility for her own health crisis. That's insane. The security footage shows what it shows. But footage can be interpreted different ways. Harper's people are already suggesting that you were acting aggressively, that you didn't identify yourself as trained, that the executives were just trying to protect their CEO from an unknown threat." Eli felt the familiar weight of despair settling back onto his shoulders. "So nothing's changed. He's going to get away with it." "Not if I have anything to say about it." Rebecca's voice was fierce. "I was there, Mr. Barrett. I saw everything, and I'm not the only one. There are others who were in that room, who saw what really happened, who are tired of being afraid of Harper Doyle." "Others?" "A group of us have been meeting, quietly, sharing information, gathering evidence. We call ourselves the 37. She smiled grimly. "For the floor where it happened." "How many are you?" 12 so far, but more are coming forward every day. The press conference gave people courage. They're finally willing to speak up." Eli looked at this young woman, at the determination in her eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. He wasn't alone. He had never been alone. There had always been others like him, watching from the shadows, waiting for permission to step into the light. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Your story, your testimony, your willingness to stand up in front of a board of directors and tell them exactly what happened that night." She paused. "It won't be easy. Harper's lawyers will try to tear you apart. They'll bring up your background, your divorce, your financial struggles. They'll try to make you look like a gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. Let them try." Eli's voice was steady. "I've got nothing to hide." "Then you're braver than most." Rebecca finished her coffee and stood. "The board hearing is scheduled for Friday. 3 days from now. Ms. Reed wants you to be there to testify in person. Are you willing? Eli thought of Mia, of Mrs. Nguyen, of all the people at Reed Industries who struggled in silence while executives like Harper Doyle played their games of power and privilege. He thought of his father, who had worked himself to death in a factory that never knew his name. He thought of his mother, who had cleaned houses for wealthy families and always came home smelling of other people's lives. I'll be there, he said, and I'll tell them everything. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Juliana's legal team descended on the apartment like a well-dressed army, drilling Eli on every aspect of his testimony. They asked him to describe the night of the incident in excruciating detail, from the moment he first heard the commotion to the moment the elevator doors closed on his face. They asked about his CPR training, his employment history, his relationship with other Reed Industries employees. They asked questions he had never thought to ask himself, forcing him to examine his own motivations with a clinical precision that left him exhausted. "Why did you push through the crowd?" one of the lawyers asked during a particularly grueling session. "What made you decide to intervene when no one else would? I told you she was dying, but you didn't know who she was. You'd never met her before. Why risk your job, your reputation, your freedom for a stranger?" Eli was quiet for a long moment, searching for an answer that would satisfy them, but the truth was simpler than they wanted it to be. "Because someone had to," he said finally, "and no one else was going to." The lawyer nodded slowly, making a note on his pad. "That's good. That's what we need the board to understand. This wasn't about opportunity or calculation. This was pure instinct, the instinct of a good man doing what good men do." The morning of the hearing, Eli woke before dawn. He stood at the window of the apartment, watching the sun rise over Philadelphia, and tried to calm the storm of anxiety churning in his stomach. In a few hours, he would walk into a room full of people who controlled billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs. He would tell his story, answer their questions, and hope that they believed him. And if they didn't? He pushed the thought away. He couldn't afford to think about failure. Not today. Mia found him there an hour later, still standing at the window, still watching the city wake up. "Daddy, are you okay?" "Just thinking." She came to stand beside him, her small hand slipping into his. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," he admitted. "Me too." She squeezed his hand. "But I'll be there, watching. And whenever you feel scared, you can look at me and remember that I believe in you." Eli felt his eyes sting with tears he refused to shed. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from my daddy." He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the strawberry scent of her hair, memorizing the feeling of her small body against his chest. Whatever happened today, whatever the board decided, this moment was real. This love was real. And no one could take that away. The board hearing was held in the same conference room where Eli had saved Juliana's life. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The room had been rearranged, the long table replaced by a U-shaped configuration that put the board members on 3 sides, and a single chair in the center, like a defendant's seat in a courtroom. Juliana sat at the head of the table, flanked by her most trusted allies. Harper Doyle, despite his termination, had been allowed to attend as a witness, and he sat in the corner with his lawyers, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Eli entered the room at exactly 9 o'clock, dressed in a borrowed suit that still didn't quite fit, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. He found the chair in the center and sat down, his hands folded in his lap to keep them from trembling. "Mr. Barrett." The board chairman, a white-haired man named Harrison Powell, spoke first. "Thank you for joining us today. We understand this must be difficult for you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, sir. Let me be clear about the purpose of this hearing. We are here to establish the facts of what occurred on the night of November 15th, and to determine the appropriate response from this company. You will be asked to give your account of events, after which you will face questions from board members and other relevant parties." He paused, glancing at Harper. "Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Then please, in your own words, tell us what happened that night." Eli took a deep breath and began. He told them about the fluorescent lights and the squeaky cart, about the empty corridors and the muffled voices from the conference room. He told them about the moment the door burst open and people started screaming. He told them about Juliana's blue lips and lifeless eyes, about the crowd that stood frozen while their CEO died in front of them. And he told them about the choice he made. "I didn't think about the consequences," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I didn't think about my job or my reputation or what people would say. I saw a woman who wasn't breathing, whose heart had stopped, and I knew that if someone didn't act in the next few seconds, she would die. So I acted." "You claim you're certified in CPR," one of the board members interrupted. "Can you prove that?" "I have my certification card, yes. I also have records from the community center where I took the course, and the instructor has agreed to testify on my behalf." "And you expect us to believe that a janitor with minimal training was capable of resuscitating a woman in full cardiac arrest?" "I don't expect you to believe anything." Eli met the man's eyes without flinching. "I expect you to look at the facts. The security footage shows me performing CPR exactly as I was trained. The paramedics who arrived on scene confirmed that my technique was correct. And Ms. Reed is sitting in this room right now, alive and healthy, because I didn't let anyone stop me." A murmur rippled through the room. Juliana's eyes met his across the table, and she gave a slight nod of approval. The questioning continued for hours. Board members probed every aspect of his story, looking for inconsistencies, weaknesses, anything that could be used to discredit him. They asked about his divorce, his financial struggles, his relationship with other employees. They implied that he had been hoping for a reward, that his heroism was really just a calculated gamble. Through it all, Eli remained calm. He answered every question honestly, admitted when he didn't know something, and refused to let their insinuations rattle him. He thought of Mia, sitting in the gallery behind him, and drew strength from her presence. And then it was Harper Doyle's turn. The former CFO rose from his chair and approached the center of the room, his lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. He looked different than Eli remembered, smaller somehow, his confident swagger replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. "Mr. Barrett," Harper began, his voice silky smooth, "you've given us a very touching story. The humble janitor, the dying CEO, the moment of heroic intervention. But there are some details you've left out, aren't there?" "I don't know what you mean." "Let me refresh your memory." Harper pulled a folder from his briefcase. "In June of this year, you were observed in a stairwell with my former administrative assistant, Sarah Chen. She was in a state of distress. Her clothing was disheveled. You were alone with her for approximately 15 minutes before calling a cab." He looked up, his eyes glittering. "Would you like to explain what happened during those 15 minutes? The room went silent. Eli felt the blood drain from his face. "That's not—" She was upset. "I was trying to help her." "Help her how, exactly?" "I gave her my jacket. I called her a cab. I asked if she wanted me to call the police." "The police?" Harper's eyebrow raised. "Why would she need the police, Mr. Barrett?" "Because she was—" Eli stopped himself, realizing the trap. If he said what he suspected, if he accused Harper without proof, he would look like he was deflecting. But if he stayed silent, the implication would hang in the air, poisoning everything he'd said. "She was what, Mr. Barrett?" "She was scared." Eli's voice was quiet but firm. "She wouldn't tell me what happened, but I could see that someone had hurt her. I did what I could to help." "How noble of you." Harper's voice dripped with sarcasm. "And yet, despite your heroic instincts, you never reported this incident to anyone. You never filed a complaint, never contacted HR, never mentioned it to your supervisors." "I didn't think it was my place. Or perhaps you were protecting yourself. Perhaps you were the one who had hurt her, and you were afraid she would talk." "That's a lie!" Eli was on his feet before he knew what was happening, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I never touched her. I would never—" "Mr. Barrett, please sit down." Harrison Powell's voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Doyle, you will refrain from making unsubstantiated accusations." "I'm simply pointing out," Harper said smoothly, "that Mr. Barrett has a history of being in compromising situations with female employees. First Ms. Chen, then Miss Reed. One might see a pattern. One might also see a man who consistently tries to help women in distress." Juliana's voice rang out, cold and sharp. "Mr. Doyle, You've been terminated from this company for cause. You're here as a courtesy, not a right. If you continue to slander witnesses, I'll have security remove you." Harper's face flushed red. "You can't." "I can, and I will." Juliana stood, her presence filling the room. "Board members, I'd like to call a witness who can speak directly to the incident Mr. Doyle has raised." She nodded toward the door, and it opened to reveal Sarah Chen. The young woman walked into the room with her head held high, though Eli could see her hands trembling at her sides. She was thinner than he remembered, paler, but there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Ms. Chen," Juliana said gently, "would you please tell the board what happened in June?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Harper Doyle attacked me in his office after a late meeting. He said no one would believe me if I told. He said he would destroy my career if I spoke up. When I ran, I ended up in the stairwell. That's where Mr. Barrett found me." The room erupted. Board members shouted questions. Harper's lawyers jumped to their feet, demanding the testimony be struck. And Harper himself, his mask finally slipping, turned on Sarah with a snarl that revealed the monster beneath. "You lying little—" "That's enough!" Harrison Powell's voice boomed through the chaos. "Security, remove Mr. Doyle from this hearing immediately." 2 guards appeared, taking Harper by the arms. He struggled against them, his face twisted with fury, his eyes locked on Eli with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical force. "This isn't over, Barrett," he spat as they dragged him toward the door. "You think you've won? You haven't won anything. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy all of you." The door closed behind him, cutting off his screams, and a heavy silence fell over the room. Juliana waited until the echoes faded before speaking again. "Board members, I think we've seen enough. Mr. Barrett acted with courage and integrity on the night of November 15th. He saved my life at great personal cost, and he has been unjustly persecuted ever since. I move that we formally exonerate him, compensate him for his suffering, and offer him a position within this company." "I second the motion," said another board member. "All in favor?" Hands raised around the table, one by one, then all at once, until the vote was unanimous. "The motion carries." Harrison Powell's voice was solemn. "Mr. Barrett, on behalf of Reed Industries, I apologize for the injustice you have suffered. You are hereby cleared of all allegations, and your record will reflect the truth of what happened that night." Eli sat very still, the words washing over him like warm rain. It was over. After weeks of torment, after losing everything and nearly losing his life, it was finally over. He had won. Behind him, Mia burst into tears. The aftermath of the hearing was chaos of a different kind. Reporters crowded the lobby of Reed Industries headquarters, shouting questions and waving microphones. Eli shielded Mia with his body as they pushed through to the waiting car, while Juliana's security team formed a protective barrier around them. "Mr. Barrett, how does it feel to be vindicated? Will you be pressing charges against Harper Doyle? Ms. Reed, is it true you've offered Mr. Barrett a job?" They made it to the car and the doors closed, sealing out the chaos. Eli slumped against the leather seats, his whole body trembling with exhaustion and relief. "You did it, Daddy." Mia crawled into his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You told the truth, and they believed you." "We did it," he corrected her. "All of us. Together." Juliana slid into the car beside them, her own face showing signs of strain. "Harper will be arrested within the hour. Sarah's testimony, combined with the evidence we've gathered, gives the police more than enough to charge him. What about his friends? His connections? Some will try to help him. Most will distance themselves as quickly as possible." A grim smile crossed her face. "Harper cultivated loyalty through fear. Once people see that he can be beaten, that fear evaporates." Eli nodded slowly, processing everything that had happened. It still didn't feel real. None of it felt real. "What now?" he asked. "Now?" Juliana looked out the window at the city passing by. "Now we build something better, starting with you, Mr. Director of Employee Welfare. I still don't know if I'm qualified for that." "You will be." She turned back to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. "I have faith in you, Eli Barrett. You've earned it." Mia stirred in his lap, looking up at him with eyes that held no doubt, no fear, only absolute certainty. I told you, Daddy. Good people win in the end. Eli held his daughter close and watched the Philadelphia skyline glitter in the fading light. He thought of everything he had lost, everything he had found, and everything that still lay ahead. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his daughter was right. The first day of his new life began with a cup of coffee that cost more than his old hourly wage. Eli stood in the gleaming lobby of Reed Industries headquarters, holding the ceramic mug someone had pressed into his hands, and tried to make sense of the transformation that had occurred in the space of a single week. The same marble floors he had once mopped now reflected his polished shoes. The same security guards who had dragged him to the elevator now nodded respectfully as he passed. The same elevators that had carried him down in disgrace now carried him up to the executive floor, where a corner office with his name on the door waited like a dream he hadn't dared to imagine. Director of Employee Welfare. The title still felt foreign on his tongue, like a word from a language he was only beginning to learn. Nervous? Juliana appeared beside him, dressed in one of her signature power suits, her silver hair pulled back in its usual elegant twist. She looked different now that Eli knew her better, softer somehow, more human. The CEO mask she wore for the public was just that, a mask, beneath which lived a woman who had spent her entire life building walls and was only now learning how to take them down. Terrified, Eli admitted. I keep waiting for someone to realize they've made a mistake. They haven't. Juliana took a sip of her own coffee, her gray eyes studying him over the rim. I've been watching you this past week, Eli, the way you talk to people, the way you listen, the way you remember names and faces and details that most executives would consider beneath their notice. She paused. You have a gift, one that can't be taught. I just treat people the way I'd want to be treated. Exactly. And in this building, that makes you revolutionary. They rode the elevator together in comfortable silence, and when the doors opened onto the 37th floor, Eli felt his heart skip a beat. This was the floor where everything had changed, the floor where he had saved a life and lost his own, the floor where he had been dragged away in disgrace while the woman he rescued reached for him with desperate, confused eyes. Now he was back. Not as a janitor, not as a criminal, but as someone who mattered. His office was larger than his old apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city he loved. A mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, flanked by leather chairs and bookshelves that were currently empty but waiting to be filled. On the desk sat a single item, a framed photograph of Mia, her gap-toothed grin captured forever in the moment before everything fell apart. I had that sent over from the evidence files, Juliana said, noticing his gaze. It was in your locker when they cleaned it out. I thought you might want it back. Eli picked up the frame, his throat tight with emotion. Thank you. There's one more thing. She handed him a folder. Your first assignment. He opened it to find a stack of employee files, each one flagged with notes and observations. Single parents working double shifts, workers with medical conditions they couldn't afford to treat, families living on the edge of homelessness, one missed paycheck away from disaster. These are the ones who need help the most, Juliana explained. I want you to reach out to each of them personally, find out what they need, figure out how we can help. There must be hundreds of people in this situation. Thousands, probably, but we start somewhere. Her eyes met his. We start with the ones who are most invisible, the ones the system has tried hardest to erase. Eli looked down at the files, at the names and faces of people who were struggling just as he had struggled, who were invisible just as he had been invisible. He thought of his father, working himself to death in a factory that never knew his name. He thought of his mother, coming home every night with aching feet and someone else's dirt under her fingernails. He thought of Mrs. Nguyen, sitting alone in her apartment with health problems she couldn't afford to fix. And he thought of himself, just a few weeks ago, lying on a threadbare couch in a freezing apartment, certain that he was going to die. I'll start today, he said. The weeks that followed were the most exhausting and exhilarating of Eli's life. He threw himself into his new role with a passion that surprised even him, spending long hours reviewing files, conducting interviews, and developing programs that addressed the needs he uncovered. He established an emergency assistance fund for employees facing sudden financial hardship. He partnered with local clinics to provide affordable healthcare options. He created a mentorship program that connected struggling workers with more experienced colleagues who could offer guidance and support. But the most important thing he did was listen. He held open office hours 3 times a week, inviting any employee who wanted to talk to come and share their concerns. At first, the chairs remained empty, workers too suspicious or too afraid to trust this strange new executive who had appeared out of nowhere. But gradually, as word spread about the janitor who had become a director, people began to show up. They told him about impossible commutes and impossible childcare costs. They told him about supervisors who bullied them and coworkers who ignored them. They told him about the daily humiliations of being poor in a world that worshipped wealth, about the shame of not being able to afford lunch in the cafeteria, about the terror of calling in sick because they knew their jobs wouldn't be waiting when they returned. And Eli listened. He took notes. He promised to do what he could. And then, one by one, he kept those promises. The first major victory came 6 weeks into his tenure. A warehouse worker named Marcus Johnson had been facing eviction, his family of 4 about to be thrown onto the streets because of medical bills from his wife's emergency appendectomy. The company's existing assistance programs were too slow, too bureaucratic, too tangled in red tape to help in time. Eli cut through all of it. He called the landlord personally, negotiating a payment plan that would keep the Johnsons in their home. He arranged for the medical bills to be covered through a combination of company funds and charitable donations. He connected Marcus with a financial counselor who could help the family build stability for the future. When Marcus came to his office to thank him, tears streaming down his face, Eli felt something shift inside him, something that had been broken for a very long time, finally clicking back into place. "You saved my family," Marcus said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how to ever repay you." "You don't have to repay me," Eli replied. "Just pay it forward. Help someone else when you have the chance." Marcus nodded, gripping Eli's hand so tightly it hurt. "I will. I promise." Word of the Johnson case spread through the company like wildfire. Suddenly, Eli's office hours weren't just attended, they were overflowing. People lined up in the hallway waiting for their chance to speak with the man who had saved Marcus Johnson's family, the man who actually listened, the man who actually cared. And with each person he helped, Eli felt himself becoming more of who he was meant to be. But not everyone was happy about the changes. There were executives who resented his presence, who saw his programs as wasteful expenditures that ate into the bottom line. There were managers who felt threatened by his direct access to their workers, who worried that their own failures were being exposed. And there were those who simply couldn't accept that a former janitor now walked the same halls they did, attended the same meetings, wielded the same influence. Eli ignored them all. He had spent his entire life being underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. He knew how to work around people who didn't believe in him, and he knew that the only way to prove his worth was through results. The results came quickly. Within 3 months, employee satisfaction scores had risen by 20%. Turnover rates dropped dramatically as workers felt for the first time that someone in the company actually cared about their well-being. Productivity increased as people who had been struggling with personal crises finally got the support they needed to focus on their jobs. And the media took notice. A feature story in the Philadelphia Inquirer called Eli the Conscience of Corporate America. A segment on the local news highlighted his work with struggling families. A business magazine interviewed him about his unconventional approach to employee welfare, calling him a disruptor in the best sense of the word. Through it all, Eli remained grounded. He still lived in the same apartment Juliana had arranged for him, though he could now afford something grander. He still picked Mia up from school every afternoon, helping her with homework and cooking dinner together. He still visited Mrs. Nguyen every weekend, bringing her groceries and sitting with her while she told stories of her life in Vietnam. And he still thought about the night that had started it all, the night he had pushed through a crowd of frozen executives to save a dying woman's life. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand at his office window and look out at the city lights, and he would wonder what would have happened if he had been like everyone else, if he had hesitated, if he had looked away. Juliana would be dead. That much was certain. But beyond that, nothing would have changed. Harper Doyle would still be terrorizing employees. thousands of workers would still be struggling in silence. The system would have continued grinding on, indifferent to the human suffering it created. One moment of courage had changed everything, one choice to act when everyone else stood frozen. It was a lesson Eli carried with him every day, a reminder that the world was changed not by grand gestures or sweeping policies, but by ordinary people making extraordinary choices in the moments that mattered most. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a courier in a crisp uniform. Eli opened the envelope to find an embossed card requesting his presence at the annual Reed Industries Leadership Summit, a 3-day gathering of the company's top executives at a resort in the Poconos. He was listed as a keynote speaker, scheduled to address the entire leadership team on the topic of human-centered corporate culture. He stared at the card for a long time, his heart racing. Problem? Juliana appeared in his doorway, a knowing smile on her face. You did this. I did. I can't speak to hundreds of executives. I don't have the training, the experience. You have something better. She stepped into his office and sat down across from him. You have authenticity. You have a story that no one else in that room can tell. And you have a perspective that most of those executives have never considered. They'll eat me alive. Some of them will try. Others will listen. Her eyes held his. This is your chance, Eli. Your chance to change not just this company, but the way people think about work, about workers, about what matters in business. And if I fail? Then you fail, and you try again. She leaned forward. I failed more times than I can count. Every successful person has. The only real failure is refusing to try at all. Eli looked down at the invitation, at the elegant script that spelled out his name and title, Director of Employee Welfare, a title that hadn't existed 6 months ago, a position he had created with his own hands, his own vision, his own stubborn refusal to accept that the world had to be the way it was. I'll do it, he said finally. But I'm going to do it my way. Juliana smiled. I wouldn't expect anything less. The summit was held at a sprawling mountain resort, all rustic elegance and breathtaking views. Eli arrived with Mia in tow, having refused to leave her behind for 3 days. She explored the grounds with wide-eyed wonder, while her father prepared for the speech that could define the next chapter of his career. The night before his keynote, Eli sat on the balcony of his room, looking out at the stars that blazed above the mountain peaks. The speech he had prepared sat in his lap, 15 pages of carefully crafted arguments and statistics and policy recommendations. He read through it one more time, then he crumpled it into a ball and threw it over the railing. When he took the stage the next morning, facing an audience of 400 executives in a ballroom that smelled of coffee and ambition, he had no notes, no slides, no carefully rehearsed talking points. He had only his story. My name is Eli Barrett, he began, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. 6 months ago, I was a janitor at this company. I pushed a mop. I emptied trash cans. I cleaned toilets that most of you never even knew existed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I was invisible. I walked these halls for 3 years, and most of you never noticed me. I wasn't a person to you. I was a function, a service, something that happened in the background while you focused on the important work. He paused, letting the words sink in. And then, one night, your CEO collapsed in a conference room. Her heart stopped. She was dying on the floor, surrounded by dozens of people who had the power to save her, and every single one of them froze. The room was utterly silent now, except me. I pushed through that crowd. I dropped to my knees. I performed CPR until her heart started beating again. And for that act, for saving the life of the most important person in this company, I was fired, blacklisted, and nearly destroyed. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the executives who had been part of the system that tried to erase him. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you this because it illustrates something fundamental about how we think about people. When I was a janitor, I was invisible. When I saved a life, I became a threat. And it wasn't until someone in power, someone like you, decided to see me differently that anything changed. He took a deep breath. Every person who works for this company has a story. They have families, dreams, struggles that you know nothing about. They come to work every day and give you their time, their energy, their lives. And in return, most of them feel exactly the way I felt, invisible. He stepped out from behind the podium, moving closer to the audience. That has to change. Not because it's good for business, although it is. Not because it improves productivity, although it does. It has to change because it's right. Because the people who clean your offices and stock your warehouses and answer your phones are human beings who deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be treated with dignity. His voice rose with passion. I'm asking you to look at your teams with new eyes, to learn the names of the people who serve you, to ask about their lives, their challenges, their dreams, to create a culture where everyone, from the CEO to the night shift janitor, feels like they matter. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. Because they do matter, every single one of them. And if you can't see that, if you can't believe that, then I don't know why you're in a position of leadership at all. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone began to clap. The applause spread like wildfire, rolling through the ballroom in waves that grew louder and louder until the entire audience was on their feet. Eli stood at the center of it all, overwhelmed by the response, tears streaming down his face as the sound washed over him. He had done it. He had told his truth. And for the first time in his life, the world had listened. After the speech, executives lined up to shake his hand, to ask questions, to share their own stories of workers they had overlooked and opportunities they had missed. Juliana stood at the back of the room, watching with an expression that might have been pride or might have been something deeper. When the crowd finally dispersed, she approached him. "That was remarkable," she said quietly. "I just told the truth. The truth, told well, is the most powerful force in the world." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've started something today, Eli, something bigger than either of us can imagine." "What do you mean?" "This speech is going to be shared, discussed, debated. Other companies are going to hear about it. Other leaders are going to wonder if they should be doing things differently." She smiled. "You've planted a seed. Now we watch it grow." Eli looked around the ballroom, at the empty chairs and the lingering conversations, at the morning light streaming through the tall windows. He thought of Mia, waiting for him back at their room, probably bored out of her mind by now. He thought of Mrs. Nguyen, who would want to hear every detail when he got home. He thought of Marcus Johnson and Sarah Chen and all the others whose lives had been touched by his work. And he thought of the night shift janitor who had refused to look away, who had pushed through a crowd of frozen executives to save a dying woman's life, who had lost everything and found something more valuable than he could have imagined. That janitor was gone now, transformed into something new. But the core of who he was, the instinct to help, the refusal to accept injustice, the stubborn belief that one person could make a difference, that would never change. That was who Eli Barrett had always been. That was who he would always be. The auditorium was filled to capacity, every seat taken by faces that represented the full spectrum of American labor. Union leaders sat beside corporate executives. Factory workers shared rows with senators. Journalists lined the walls, their cameras capturing a moment that would be replayed on news networks across the country for weeks to come. The National Conference on Worker Dignity had drawn an unprecedented crowd to Philadelphia's Convention Center. And at the center of it all, waiting in the wings with a speech that would change everything, stood Eli Barrett. 18 months had passed since the night he saved Juliana Reed's life. 18 months since he had been dragged from a conference room in disgrace, his reputation destroyed, his future seemingly erased. In that time, the employee welfare initiative he had created at Reed Industries had become a model for corporations across the nation. Dozens of companies had adopted similar programs. Legislation inspired by his work was moving through Congress, and the man who had once pushed a mop through empty corridors was now recognized as one of the most influential voices in the American labor movement. But standing here, moments away from addressing thousands of people, Eli felt the same terror he had felt on his first day as director. The same voice in his head whispering that he didn't belong, that someone would eventually realize the mistake, that the janitor in the borrowed suit was about to be exposed. "Daddy?" Mia's voice cut through the noise in his head. She stood beside him in the wings, 11 years old now, taller than she had been, wiser than she should have had to become. Her hand slipped into his, small and warm and steady. "You're going to be amazing," she said simply. "How do you know?" "Because you always are." She squeezed his hand. "And because I'll be watching, just like at the summit, just like always." Eli looked down at his daughter, at the fierce pride shining in her eyes, and felt the fear begin to recede. She had been with him through everything: the darkest nights in the freezing apartment, the fever that had nearly killed him, the hearing where Harper Doyle had tried to destroy him one last time. Through it all, she had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. He bent down and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Mia." "I love you too, Daddy. Now go change the world." The announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium, introducing him with a string of titles and accomplishments that still felt like they belonged to someone else. Director of Employee Welfare, architect of the Reed Model. Time Magazine's Person of the Year finalist, the man who had started a revolution. Eli walked onto the stage, and the applause that greeted him was like a physical wave, washing over him with a force that nearly stopped him in his tracks. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and waited for the sound to fade. When silence finally fell, he spoke. 2 years ago, I was invisible. The words hung in the air, simple and powerful. I worked the night shift at a company most of you have heard of. I cleaned floors and emptied trash cans and scrubbed toilets that executives used without ever wondering who kept them clean. I was a single father, barely making rent, watching my daughter grow up in a world that seemed determined to keep us down. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. And then, one night, I saved a life. The CEO of my company collapsed during a board meeting. Her heart stopped. And while everyone else stood frozen, I did what I had been trained to do. I performed CPR. I breathed air into her lungs. I fought for her life until she came back. A murmur rippled through the audience. For that act, I was fired. Accused of assault, blacklisted from every job in the city. My name was dragged through the mud by people who had never bothered to learn it in the first place. I lost everything, not because I had done something wrong, but because I had dared to cross a line that wasn't supposed to be crossed. The line between those who matter and those who don't. His voice grew stronger. But here's what I learned in those dark weeks when I thought my life was over. I learned that the system that tried to destroy me was not inevitable. It was not natural. It was built by human beings, and it could be changed by human beings. All it took was one person with the courage to stand up and say, "This is not right." He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. "I'm not here today because I'm special. I'm here because I got lucky, because the woman I saved happened to be someone with the power to set things right. But there are millions of workers in this country who will never get that lucky break, who will be ground down by a system that treats them as expendable, who will struggle and suffer and die without ever being seen." His voice broke slightly, but he pushed through. "That's what we're here to change, not with charity or sympathy or empty promises, with real structural change that recognizes the fundamental dignity of every human being who shows up to work, with policies that ensure no one has to choose between paying rent and seeing a doctor, with cultures that value people over profit, that see workers as human beings instead of line items on a spreadsheet." He looked directly into the cameras, knowing that millions more were watching from their homes. "I was invisible once, but I refuse to be invisible anymore. And I refuse to let anyone else be invisible either. Every janitor, every warehouse worker, every cashier and nurse and truck driver, you matter. Your work matters. Your life matters. And anyone who tells you otherwise is lying." The applause began before he finished speaking, rising from the audience like a tide that could not be contained. People stood, their hands coming together in a rhythm that seemed to shake the very walls of the auditorium. And at the center of it all, Eli Barrett stood with tears streaming down his face, finally allowing himself to believe that the journey that had begun on the worst night of his life had led him to exactly where he was meant to be. The reception afterward was a blur of handshakes and congratulations and business cards pressed into his palm. Senators wanted to discuss legislation. CEOs wanted to implement his programs. Journalists wanted interviews that would run on primetime television. But Eli only had eyes for one person. Juliana Reed stood at the edge of the crowd, watching him with an expression he had come to know well over the past 18 months. Pride, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked almost like wonder. He made his way to her, weaving through the throng of well-wishers until they stood face to face. "That was quite a speech," she said. "I had a good teacher." "You had a good story." She smiled, and the years seemed to fall away from her face. "I'm proud of you, Eli, proud of everything you've built. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. It might have taken longer. It might have looked different, but you would have found a way." Her gray eyes held his. "That's who you are, someone who finds a way." Before he could respond, a small body slammed into his legs. "Daddy, Daddy, you did so good!" Eli scooped Mia into his arms, holding her tight as she wrapped herself around him. "You think so?" "I know so. Everyone was crying, even that mean-looking lady in the front row." "That was a senator, sweetheart." "Well, she was crying." Mia pulled back to look at him, her face serious. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Are you happy now?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about it for a long moment, really thought, examining the landscape of his heart with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. Was he happy? He thought of the apartment he shared with Mia, modest but warm, filled with books and photographs and the smell of whatever they had cooked for dinner. He thought of Mrs. Nguyen, healthy now thanks to the specialist Juliana had arranged, still bringing him containers of pho every Sunday. He thought of Marcus Johnson, who had been promoted twice since Eli intervened in his crisis, and Sarah Chen, who was now running her own department at a company that actually valued her. He thought of Juliana, standing beside him with her knowing smile, a partner and friend in ways neither of them had expected. And he thought of himself. Not the janitor who had been invisible, not the accused who had been destroyed, but the man who had emerged from the wreckage, stronger and wiser and more certain of his purpose than he had ever been before. "Yes," he said finally. "I'm happy." "Good." Mia nestled against his chest. "Because you deserve to be happy. You're a good person, Daddy. The best person I know." Eli held his daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, and felt something settle into place in his chest, a peace he hadn't known he was searching for. A sense of completion that had nothing to do with achievements or recognition or the applause of thousands. He had found his purpose. He had found his voice, and most importantly, he had found a way to use both in service of something larger than himself. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the auditorium had emptied, Eli stood alone on the steps of the convention center, looking out at the Philadelphia skyline. The city glittered in the darkness. The same lights he had watched from the 37th floor of Reed Industries on the night everything changed. But they looked different now, warmer, more welcoming, as if the city itself had shifted to make room for him. Footsteps approached from behind, and Juliana appeared at his side. "Thinking deep thoughts?" she asked. "Just remembering." "The night we met?" "The night I almost died." He turned to look at her. "Both times." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "I've been thinking about that too, about how close we both came to losing everything. But we didn't." "No, we didn't." She smiled slightly. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that night? If you had been on a different floor or called in sick or simply decided not to get involved?" "All the time." Eli's voice was soft. "I'd be dead. You'd be dead. And the world would have just kept spinning, indifferent to both of us. But you were there, and you chose to act." She turned to face him fully. That choice, that single moment of courage, it changed everything, not just for you and me, but for thousands of people who will never know your name. "I was just doing what anyone would do." "No." Her voice was firm. "You were doing what almost no one does. You were being extraordinary in a moment that demanded it, and that, Eli Barrett, is the rarest thing in the world." They stood in comfortable silence, two people who had been brought together by tragedy and transformed by the choices they made afterward. The night air was cool but not cold, carrying the sounds of the city, car horns and distant music, and the murmur of life continuing all around them. "What happens now?" Eli asked finally. "Now?" Juliana looked out at the skyline. "Now we keep going. We take what we've built and we expand it. We fight the battles that still need fighting. We change the minds that still need changing. And when we're done, we'll never be done. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. That's the beautiful thing about this kind of work. There's always more to do, always more people to help, always more systems to change. She reached out and took his hand, the same gesture she had made in the hospital room 18 months ago when she had promised to set things right. But we don't have to do it alone. That's the other thing I've learned. We find our people, we build our teams, we create communities of individuals who believe in the same things we believe in, and together we become unstoppable. Eli squeezed her hand, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. He thought of Mia, asleep in the hotel room upstairs, dreaming whatever dreams 11-year-olds dream. He thought of Mrs. Nguyen, who called him her son now, who treated him like family because he had treated her like family first. He thought of Rebecca Torres and Marcus Johnson and Sarah Chen and all the others who had become part of the movement he had accidentally started. He thought of the janitor he had been, invisible and overlooked, pushing his cart through empty corridors in the middle of the night. And he thought of the man he had become, standing on the steps of a convention center after addressing thousands of people, his hand clasped in the hand of a woman who had once been the most powerful person he had ever known and was now simply his friend. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. When no one else did." Juliana was silent for a moment. Then she released his hand and stepped back, her expression soft in the glow of the city lights. "You saved my life, Eli. You fought for me when everyone else gave up. Seeing you was the least I could do." She turned and walked back toward the convention center, pausing at the door to look back over her shoulder. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start changing the world again." Then she was gone, and Eli was alone with the night and the city and the future stretching out before him like an endless road. He stood there for a long time, breathing in the cool air, letting the peace wash over him. Then he turned and walked back inside, ready to collect his daughter and return to the life they had built together. A life he had never imagined, a life he had never dared to dream, but a life that was his, earned through courage and compassion and the stubborn refusal to look away when someone needed help. He had saved one life, and in return, he had found purpose, dignity, and a voice powerful enough to change an entire system. The janitor who refused to look away had become a force that could not be ignored, and he was just getting started. The end.